Sam Raimi's back, baby. This week, we review Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Doctor Strange, I always suspected this day would come. Because you always suspected this day would come. I'm ready.
On May 6th, nothing can prepare you for the mind-bending descent into madness.
This is the only way.
Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Rated PG-13. See it in premium large formats and IMAX.
My name is Jerome Cuson, and we would like to welcome you to episode 88 of Superhero Pantheon here on the Real World Podcasting Network. You can follow us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week is Brian DeBrain. You can follow him on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Follow me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. Brian, there is so much to discuss this week. Last week, we really struggled, or at least I struggled, to come up with things to discuss in regards to the television show Moon Knight. This week, we will have no such issues because there are so many cameos to discuss. There's a lot of plot stuff to talk about, the greatness of Sam Raimi. But Brian, we have to start with this because I know that this, for you, may have been your most significant moment when Charles Xavier... I mean, we knew that Patrick Stewart was in this movie. They spoiled it ahead of time. But Brian, as he floats in his yellow chair, what do we hear?
Oh my God! Dun, 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 dun. And then, even though it was Danny Elfman, and I've had my complaints about Danny Elfman, believe me, he really did not take the score down or the movie down with his score. Sometimes he'll do that. Didn't do that this time. And when he played those notes, man, I was like, oh my God, they know it. They know their audience well enough to do this right now. And I've had a tear in my eye. And then when he gave that line about, like, you know, when our character stumbles and it doesn't mean they're gone and lost forever. Oh my God. I was like, that's the Professor X I know. Spoiler alert, everybody. But that's the Professor X I know when he said that line. And then I realized, oh shit, he said that 8 years ago in Days of Future Past. No wonder it's so, like, fucking, you know, precedent and prominent. But, hey, I mean, if you're going to reuse the same line for Professor X, make it worth it and, you know, actually apply it to the plot, and it totally worked with what they were going for. And the idea that Doctor Strange is a very flawed individual in every single universe, and no matter what, he's going to take it to the extreme and think he's the one who's got to be the one that has to save the world and put it on his shoulders and think he has to do the right thing when it could be something else. And if you tie on that, you know, that idea with the idea of Professor X not giving up on people, which we've seen so many times in the movies, you know, him not giving up on certain X-Men despite them killing him, you know, it was just an emotional moment for me. When he said that line, especially like 10 minutes later, I was like, this guy, Michael Waldron, I think, gets what Professor X is all about. And please give me this kind of like Professor X in the X-Men movie eventually, the mutants, whatever you want to call it. I know it's not going to be Professor X again, but I do, you know, it's the variants, so you can just play with that idea, and we'll talk about that certainly in a minute. But yeah, I just had an emotional moment watching that, and when they played that music, man, it made me think, if you can do this, because they even credited X-Men '97 the theme, just give us the X-Men '97 theme as the main theme for the X-Men, please. Thank you.
The one thing I will say is Xavier dying joins the list of a list such that includes Batman's parents dying. I don't need to see Patrick Stewart die as Xavier ever again, please. Can we just not do that? Like, I know it's a variant, but I really the neck snapping was a little much for me. I don't know about you.
To me, it was like a joke because it's like a recurring joke now, right? That he's died by two redheads, and I forgot who killed him in Logan. But it wasn't a redhead in Logan.
It was Logan that killed Xavier in the 2017 movie.
Okay, Logan. It was the copied Logan, alpha male Logan or whatever it was. Okay, but still, like, he's died 3 times on film. I think that's the joke at this point. But I think the main joke is the fact that we know, like, it's the stuff, it's like, you know, it's the Easter egg things. Like, we know the history of, like, you know, Magneto being Wanda's, you know, father and the main most of the main universes. Still could be the MCU for all we know, and he was adopted or whatever. But I'm just toying with that idea. I just love that, and then just the idea that Professor X dealing with a highly superpowered, mutant, quote unquote, always a redhead. It's just something familiar, and this feels like it was like in the 2 minutes we had this, it felt like it was better than everything they tried it with Dark Phoenix and X-Men 3.
It is wild to me that in one calendar year, we are seeing Patrick Stewart on screen as Charles Xavier and Jean-Luc Picard. That's pretty wild to me, and it once again proves that nothing ever ends.
And if you got a good storyline for like time travel and alternate universes, you can pull it off and still do something like this. It's not like out of the ordinary. And it's not going to be our Charles Xavier in the 616 quote unquote MCU, but I do like this idea that we can have fun with this concept. And that's what I loved about this movie, is that having fun with the concept, very much like a Back to the Future 2, where when they go back or when they go to 2015, they just had so much fun with the set design and the props and the writing and all the little things you can do. And that's what they did when they go to this alternate world in the middle of the movie. And I was just like so into it. And I was so glad, because like a lot of like in Spider-Man, it was really emotional because you were just so like, oh my God, it's Andrew Garfield. Oh my God, it's Tobey Maguire. Getting so emotional over those characters. Here, I wasn't getting so much emotional except for that one part with Professor X, but everything else was just like this super fun ride that I was just having so much fun with because of what they were able to do. And little things stand out here and there, like, the Baxter Foundation, and that was like a little clue to what's to come and who's in the Illuminati. But yeah, and the fact that they went with like the little Easter eggs in the Illuminati shows that they're not ignoring all the stuff from the comics. Like, even though some of the stuff in the comic book world doesn't really make sense here in the current MCU, like the Inhumans, you can introduce them in an alternate universe and have like some non-consequential stuff by the end of it all, because they just go back to the original universe. So they had fun with it, I thought.
I do too. I think this is this is a rare MCU movie in that I actually think it gets better as the movie goes along. I think the third act is actually because I think what tends to happen with some of these movies is the third act tends to be the weakest. But I think in this specific case, it's actually the third act that's the best. And I genuinely believe that. I think this is a very Sam Raimi-esque movie. In fact, I think his direction actually elevates this to being so much better than it has any right to be. Like so many Phase 4 projects, I think the script is actually the weakest element of the movie, even though I think Michael Waldron does a solid job of kind of Frankensteining this movie together. But there is so much going on. But I think there are some really good performances in this film as well. I think Elizabeth Olsen really stands out. I think this is her best work as Wanda Maximoff / Scarlet Witch, especially with how the movie ends. And just, I think she really does a fantastic job. We are introduced to America Chavez. I think she does a great job as well in this movie, even though I don't think her character is as well developed as she should be. What else can you say about Benedict Wong? I think he does a great job, as always, playing Wong. Benedict Cumberbatch is fine. I don't think that his Doctor Strange is particularly great, but I think he's good enough for these movies. I think it's one of those situations where it's very clear what his intentions are with doing these MCU movies in terms of collecting a paycheck, which is fine, but I don't think that he has near the charisma of a Chris Evans, of a Chris Hemsworth, or of a Robert Downey Jr. So we're never going to get that. And even though it seems like they maybe try to position him as kind of the new Tony Stark, I'm just not sure if that's even possible. But I will say that this movie was enjoyable. I really did appreciate the third act. And again, this is the most Sam Raimi of Sam Raimi movies. I think that was one of the big concerns that I had is, you bring in Sam Raimi, what are you going to get from him? Because often what happens is, especially in the third act, you lose the director because of the action scenes and all that jazz. But in this case, we got a grisly movie at times. This may be one of the most violent movies in the MCU. It was just so much more visceral. And one of the things that I always bristle at, Brian, is when they talk about comparing these movies to like other genres. Like the idea that Captain America Winter Soldier is a spy paranoia thriller is absurd to me, because the last hour of that movie is every MCU movie that's ever been made. This was advertised as the MCU's first horror movie, and from beginning to end, this served up the kind of horror that you would see in a PG-13 and sometimes even in an R-rated movie. This was a horror movie. There was lots of horror imagery. There, you can make a lot of comparisons to Sam Raimi's previous work, Drag Me to Hell, the Evil Dead series. We'll even talk a little bit about Spider-Man 2 a little bit later, but there are so many Sam Raimi elements, and that made me extremely happy.
Yeah, I love the way he moves the camera, and that's like for every one of his movies, despite me not liking like Evil Dead 2, like a lot of people do. I love 1 and 3, but he just moves the camera so well, and he learned that from his first movie in Evil Dead when he had put a fucking camera on a piece of plank wood and just carried it through the woods, making it look so scary and seamless. You can see that right off the beginning when they're on that traveling road to the Book of Ashanti or whatever it was. That was so trippy. But I think he was the right fit for this. And I've heard a lot of criticisms. Like I've read a lot of different reviews about his style not working for this movie and how it's just like it's too Sam Raimi and it's just like whatever. And it's just like, well, here's the thing. Like I went with a friend who's not really like, knowledgeable about movie directors, just a fan of movies in general. And he's seen the Spider-Man movies and he's not really familiar with the work of quote unquote Sam Raimi, right? The Sam Raimi visual style, right? He enjoyed the movie with no baggage whatsoever. He just was like, oh, that was great. That was fun. That was kind of like a horror movie. It had a lot of good action. It was fun. But the reviews that I keep reading are from these like older, 50-year-old, 40-year-olds who are, saw all the Sam Raimi's movies from before and they're just like sick of his style or whatever. And they're just like, oh, it's so Sam Raimi and it's too visceral and it's too this and that. I'm like, I think what the problem is that in your reviews is like, you got this excess baggage of like, with the style of Sam Raimi. If you had no idea who Sam Raimi was or what his style was, would you have the same review of the movie? So I'm thinking that's what I'm kind of thinking with all these like criticisms about Sam Raimi for directing this movie in his style. And that's why they hired him, for his style. And if you are not knowledgeable of what he was before, you know what I mean? Like the friend that I went with, it's not going to have that kind of baggage with you. So I think there's these kind of like weird, strange criticisms about the movie going around that are kind of snarky. But I think it's just because it's like, oh, we got to, we're not Sam Raimi fans, and we're not fans of it. But, people don't have that kind of baggage like a lot of critics do when they are knowledgeable of the director. If you're not really knowledgeable of the director, they're just going to go in thinking it's just another movie. And I think that's what's the main audience is going through right now. And that's why like the majority of the audience is loving it. Critics are probably like, what, 60-40, I'd say right now. But that's kind of like, again, the whole Sam Raimi
There's
effect,
definitely a mixed reaction to this movie that I don't think you're getting with some of these. I think there is a backlash to the MCU ever since Avengers Endgame. I think we've seen it in just about every movie. I think Black Widow definitely had some mixed reaction. Shang-Chi, I think, was definitely on the more positive end of things. We all saw how critics reacted to the Eternals. I think the criticism there was almost ridiculous in my view. Spider-Man, I definitely think that the majority of the reviews were positive, but even then, I think you definitely saw some criticisms, and I think the same is true here. And I think there's some legitimate criticisms of the MCU that can be made. I don't think this movie is perfect. I think you are slightly higher on this movie, but I still think that this is solid mid-tier Marvel. I think that's what this movie is. I think the Sam Raimi parts of this movie are what work. And I think when you talk about the things that work, I think it's a lot of the action, it's the visuals, it's the third act and some of the emotions, it's Elizabeth Olsen's performance. So there are still a lot of things that work, but I think that there are some things that don't work as well. I think Doctor Strange as a character, I think at times is very uninteresting, and some of that connects to Benedict Cumberbatch not being the best performer in terms of the MCU. And I think that there are some weaknesses on the script level, and the fact that there's so much going on with the multiverse. America Chavez at times does not feel like a character. And I think even in terms of Scarlet Witch being the villain, it seems like we are making quite the leap from WandaVision to here, where she is just straight up a villain. obsessed with finding her children. And Brian, she's obsessed with finding her children, but what about Vision? Did we completely forget about Vision?
I think they purposely didn't want him in the movie because I feel like, I don't know, like I don't think Vision is needed in the story anymore. Like I feel like Vision was just kind of like written off, even though we got the white Vision and he might come back or whatever. But it feels like he wasn't even needed for the story because it feels like it's more as Wanda's story than anything, right? Because like I know the other criticism too is like that whole 180, like she's a villain now she wants her kids, and it kind of negates the ending of WandaVision. Well, if you like just read what the Darkhold is, it's like it's a thing that corrupts the soul, right? And so it's like possession, you know what I mean? Once you read something from the Darkhold, it takes hold of you. So I get that logic. It's like, it's the criticism to me is kind of funny. It's kind of like asking, like, why does Reagan and the Exorcist twist her head? What does that have to do with anything? You know what I mean? Like, why does she have to do that? You know what I mean? It's because she's possessed. So she's gonna do evil shit. You know what? Like, you don't criticize or wonder why Reagan is spinning her head in The Exorcist. It's because she's evil. Again, because she's possessed by evil. So if Wanda's possessed by evil, of course she's going to do these evil things because she's not in control. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, come on, are we going to be that obvious? Like the Darkhold is this MacGuffin. The MacGuffin controls and possesses the reader. It's simple as that. That's why her fingers went black. That's why the alternate Strange had fingers that went black, is because of a curse. So to me, that was not a plot hole at all. Like I felt like, well, she was already reading at in the end credit scene of WandaVision from the Darkhold, so it's like, oh shit, she just opened up a whole can of worms, and they just kind of took over. So that's how I feel about it. I thought she did a tremendous job. She had that. It was a complete like arc from WandaVision. It wasn't a 180 for me. It was like a totally makes sense kind of thing, because in a moment of desperation, she read from the book, and you can tell like a lot of like, you know, good tragic stories, it's moments of desperation like that. So you can see, like, even though they didn't show it in WandaVision, maybe they should have showed her reading from the book for the first time. But once you show that, it's like, okay, you know, she's probably going to turn evil. And I was accepting that.
I would say that Elizabeth Olsen's performance being so good is what kind of made me better about her performance. So I think that almost is what made it okay. So that is what I would say about her performance specifically. I think there are some elements of this movie that I think are a little bit clunky, and I wish that there had been kind of more elaboration and more done. But I do appreciate the fact that this movie was just a hair over 2 hours and not 2.5 hours like so many of the MCU's most recent entries have been. So I do appreciate the fact that this got in and got out a little bit faster. But Brian, do you want to know who the real MVP of this movie is?
Are we going to go flash to 4 already, or are we going to do that later?
No, I'm going to say it's Michael Stuhlbarg's agent, because Michael Stuhlbarg is in one scene, yet is prominently listed in the credits as one of the top stars. So good for Michael Stuhlbarg's agent, getting him the money, getting him prominently featured as a major player when he is in fact only in one scene, somehow being even less involved in the Doctor Strange sequel than he was in the first movie.
Yeah, the interesting part of that was in the beginning when they're talking to each other at the wedding. Somehow it's become like general public knowledge of what the exact details happen on Titan. Have you noticed that? Like everyone knows exactly what happened on Titan. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been getting pieces of like what's going on and what people know and whatnot. So I think that's a huge part of it. I think the other thing is that, you know, you have to believe that Stephen Strange would actually have told Christine a lot of what had happened, perhaps. So that may be a huge part of it. So I mentioned some of the clunkiness. I just don't buy that Christine and Doctor Strange are this epic romantic connection. And boy, they've really tried. They have really, really tried it. The episode of What If that was about them, this movie, they're really trying to sell it, Brian. I'm not sure I'm buying it. I'm just not. I mean, I think that their ending scene was good. I think it was well shot. I think Sam Raimi does his best to make this feel as epic as, you know, Mary Jane and Peter Parker, but it just isn't. Rachel McAdams, if she wasn't in this movie, I don't think the movie would be any better or worse without her presence. And I appreciate the fact that they at least gave her a little bit more to do in the climax of the movie. But nonetheless, Rachel McAdams, again, not exactly the most memorable performer of these movies, and it's really unfortunate because she is a fantastic performer overall. But yeah, I think that's kind of where the clunkiness for me, and that was kind of some of the stuff that did not necessarily work for me.
I don't know what it was, but I think I like her way better in this than the first original Doctor Strange. And I remember in the original review for that, when we reviewed Doctor Strange, like I wasn't really high on her performance at all, and just like not really high on Rachel McAdams at all, like as a fan. That really hasn't changed much. But when I watched that What If episode last year, I thought, wow, this was a hell of a voice acting job, like a hell of a voice acting job that she did. And it kind of carried over here. It felt like this alternate version of Christine. Like I really enjoyed her performance in this movie. I felt like she kind of anchored Doctor Strange a little bit, because like, Doctor Strange can just get really arrogant and just like really like, self-absorbed, and she tells him that, and say little lines like, you always got to be the one that holds the knife kind of thing. And I always respected that, but I couldn't, love you for that kind of thing. And he was just kind of like thrown back at that. So, I really enjoyed their relationship, and I know it's teased that we wish you could have them together, but to me, it's like they're never going to get together. And that's kind of what the multiverse is telling him, is that in every single multiverse, even in the What If, it feels like they're just never destined to be together. So that's kind of my interpretation of it. So they're just kind of working together, because it's not even the same universe, obviously, but they still have that weird connection. Like he's from 616, she's from 800, whatever. But it just feels like it's just one of those things. It's just kind of like, distant lover kind of thing, but it's never destined to happen, and it probably won't, because obviously there's a new love interest in town that shows up in the mid-credit scene. So even in the comics, he doesn't really get with Christine, but Christine is kind of this figure that kind of like, kind of reminds him of his humanity kind of thing. I think that's one of those things. Kind of like what's his name, Scrooge, and that love lost in the Muppet movie Christmas Carol. So that's kind of how I see it. So.
Wow, you really went there. You made a connection between this and the Muppets. I'm pretty impressed.
Thank you. And it's Disney. Keep it in the family. So.
Absolutely. So in thinking about Doctor Strange and talking more about this movie, I do have to say that one of the most interesting elements was at the beginning, when we got Chekhov's body, as they put a dead Doctor Strange in the building, and then they brought him back. And one of the most incredible visuals that the MCU has produced in a while, it's not the body, but it's the fact that they made Doctor Strange's cape out of like the spirits. And I really like that. One of the funniest things to me about the MCU is actually how there are almost no heroes with capes except for Doctor Strange, who has a cape that is sentient. And every time I think about the capes in the MCU, I always think about the Incredibles and the no cape scene. And part of me wonders, Brian, were they listening to End of Mode? Were all these heroes listening to End of Mode and being like, no capes?
You got to think, because of the timing and everything, 2008 was Iron Man. So, 2004 was when that speech happened. You can't help but wonder, like Kevin Feige in the back of his mind, like, let's, because if you're going to make distinctive visuals and make the MCU look distinctive, which he did at that time, make certain rules like that, like no capes. And it kind of sticks out, because the only one I could think of is Thor, but he doesn't really do that anymore. He kind of stripped that down. So, yeah, I like this idea of like the only cape in the MCU is like a smart cape. And I was pretty impressed. Like, I wish they kind of showed Christine fixing it, because that was the one thing I was kind of like, whoa, like, how are they going to fix the cape? Because, like, that was the one thing that had a hole in it, but they never showed it, so they kind of leave it up to the imagination. But I just keep wondering, like, every time that cape gets destroyed, like, how does he fix it? Does he fix it with magic? How did Christine fix it? Does she have magic? There's all these questions. But I do like that sometimes when in a movie like this, if you don't answer it, it kind of leaves it up to the imagination, which kind of adds to it a little bit. You know what I mean? It's like how did let's get into it now. Like the Illuminati, like how did the Terrigen Mist get spread in that universe? Blah blah blah. And you got Black Bolt there, played by Anson Mount, who was Black Bolt in the show, The Inhumans, which went nowhere. But the fact that they casted him again and they put him under the mask. And the original mask from the comics, man. It's just those little nods. So will we one day see him back in the MCU? Maybe. Is this a preview for Secret Wars down the line, where every single character from the MCU comes back from like the Fox universe and every single universe
yeah.
combined?
I mean, it's very clear that Secret Wars is coming at some point. I mean, it's incredibly obvious that Secret Invasion is going to be kind of more of a B thing. Like, it's going to be a Disney Plus series. It's going to be fine. But Secret Wars is really what they're into right now. That's very clear to me.
Yeah, with all these different, ideas of what they're teasing. And I guess, let's go on to the big spoiler in the middle, right? John Krasinski, Mr. Fantastic.
He is Mr. Fantastic in this movie. Were I doing this podcast with Kevin Ford, who is a huge fan of the Fantastic Four? That's actually how we would have started this podcast, because Kevin was literally, apparently, the Leonardo DiCaprio meme, pointing at the screen and being super happy at the fact that Mr. Fantastic was in this movie. He did die horrifically. I will never get the sound of his head popping out of my head. I don't know if John Krasinski is going to be Mr. Fantastic. Why, Brian? Because he has to spend a lot of time in A Quiet Place.
Oh, I see what you did there. But let's look at the clues really quick, because I don't know if we actually talked about this. The release dates for Ant-Man and Fantastic Four switch. Have you heard about that?
You mean Ant-Man and the Marvels? They have switched, because I believe that Ant-Man is done filming, and I believe the Marvels has run into some challenges.
Oh, okay. So what I thought it was Fantastic Four, and they bumped Fantastic Four to February.
No, Fantastic Four and Blade do not even have announced release dates yet. So who knows when we are going to be getting those?
Okay, because I thought it was coming out next February.
I have to imagine that at D23, I believe that comes up in September. My gut tells me that we are going to be getting 2024 release dates for Blade, Fantastic Four, and Deadpool. That Deadpool 3. That is speculation on my part, but based on reading the tea leaves, my hunch is that is where we are going. I don't think that we are going to see the X-Men until at earliest 2025, 2026. I think they are going to try to take as much time as they should and really let Dark Phoenix just go by the wayside, let everyone completely forget about it, and then do whatever they're going to do with the X-Men. They had the Fantastic Four. They have all these different plot threads, all these different characters, all these new potential Young Avengers. There's absolutely no reason to rush the X-Men to the screen at this point, unless they're doing these little cameos and things of that nature. So that's kind of where I'm at with the cameos and whatnot. Should John Krasinski play Mr. Fantastic? I don't know. I don't really have a strong opinion. To me, John Krasinski is kind of an everyman. That's what he was on The Office. That's what he is in A Quiet Place. That's even what he is. I mean, the whole idea of Jack Ryan is that he's kind of an everyman, and I'm not sure if he is the appropriate casting for this role. We have seen Marvel skew much younger with a lot of the major characters that they're clearly building around. You look at Florence Pugh, Haley Steinfeld. These are people that are in their early 20s. You look at the person who is going to be playing Cassie in Quantumania, Catherine Newton. She's also in her early 20s. I think that's the direction that we're going in. Part of that undoubtedly will have to do with how old are the Fantastic Four. Is this going to be an origin story? Are we going to go with them already being established? So we'll see. I'm not convinced that he is the right person for this role, but it was certainly fun. It was certainly fun to have him. It's fun to have Haley Atwell as Captain Carter. Although, Brian, I will say it is time to retire the phrase "I could do this all day long." We need to retire that for good.
Okay, because as soon as she gave that line for Elizabeth Olsen, like, how long can you go doing this? And she's like, I yelled out like, she could do this all day, and then it was the line, and then it was great. I called it. I called lines, I called angles in movies, but that was a good moment for me. And I understand everyone's kind of done with it, but man, I had my fun going, she's gonna say it, and she said it, and I lost my mind because I really love that relationship between those two. So yeah, I had fun with that line. If you want to retire, maybe we can, but it depends if she's coming back at all. But probably in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would love to have Haley Atwell continue in the MCU in some form because I think that her character has kind of been done dirty. And Brian, I will say this, that, you know, Kevin Ford and I have been doing this series, Cancel It Too Soon. Brian, I think we may, at some point, we may do it on our own, and we may do we may review Agent Carter. I think that's a possibility.
2 seasons, and it's on the network. The network.
The network.
Disney.
It's on Disney Plus. There is no network anymore. WWE Network is on Peacock.
Yeah, I know. I say that as like a general term for all streaming services now, and I just can't break that habit. It's just kind of short term for me, but it's on the Disney Plus network, quote unquote. But all 2 seasons.
That it is. So let's talk about Bruce Campbell, because Bruce Campbell is great. It was so good to not only have him in this movie, but once again, one of his hands gets out of control. What Doctor Strange does to him is pretty monstrous. But again, I will point out another great post-credit scene. Has absolutely nothing to do with plot, but I was very tickled by it. And yeah, that's kind of where I landed. And Charlize Theron, my friend thought it was Emma Frost, but it's not. It is Doctor Strange's wife in the comics. I believe her name. It's Seal, correct?
I think it's Clay or something. I gotta hit up my buddy who's like the ultimate comic book nerd who I always hit up after every movie, and we see the movie sometimes together, and he explains everything to me.
Charlize Theron is cashing in. She wants a nice fat paycheck from the MCU, which who can blame her at this point? But it's pretty wild to me that she's going to be playing a character that absolutely nobody has any clue who she was in my screening. And I would imagine that a lot of people just, again, you got to go to Wikipedia or do a search and find out who she was, because that's kind of how the MCU has been in Phase 4. These mid-credit scene, they are introducing characters that you literally have no idea who they are. Same thing with Harry Styles in the Eternals. It's pretty crazy and it's pretty wacky.
Yeah, with the Bruce Campbell thing, I really enjoyed that. I was kind of shocked that he went full gray, because I don't think I've seen him full gray. I've seen him like do the whole black hair dye for the last 10 years now. But I'm glad he's kind of owning up to it, because I like it when older dudes got to do that. It's kind of like show some age, and I think that's kind of good sometimes. You know what I mean? So I was kind of shocked by that. But also, I don't know if you noticed this, but I noticed the second time around when America Chavez goes on this like little rant about how like most universes food is free, like I don't get this idea of why you have to charge for food or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I get the whole like message that's going on here. But then you realize that like she takes those pizza things, right? And then Bruce Campbell's like, hey, you didn't pay the papa. You got to pay the pizza papa. So the second time around, I realized like she thinks that almost every universe has free food, but it's not. She's just stealing food and doesn't realize it. Did you realize that?
I mean, it's certainly possible. I think the most fascinating aspect of her character, to me, is one of the most prominent Latinx superheroes in the MCU is a character who literally crosses borders. I think that was not lost on me as I was watching this movie, that you have this prominent character, especially at a time of a lot of political upheaval, that you have a Latinx character that is behaving in this way and crossing borders. I mean, they're not the same. Obviously, we're not talking about country borders. We're talking about multiversal borders. Her first name is America. Portals look like stars. It's all there right in the text for you. And the fact that she's stealing food, Brian, gotta tell you, the crossing borders, stealing of food, she might be a socialist, Brian, and I approve.
I think that's what they were going for, man. I was like, wait a minute. I don't think she thinks that, you know what I mean? And the second time I realized she's just going and taking food and just like assuming it's free. So that was just like, oh shit, she's like super like liberal, man. But I thought that was pretty funny considering like her character is very unique. And I do like the fact that America Chavez is like, they do explain the fact that like she has no variant in the MCU or like any other multiverse, which I think is really, really cool, because like, we had all these Loki variants, and now we're having Doctor Strange variants and Fantastic Four variants. But now, when you introduce a character that's the opposite of that, and it's like she's singular and stands out, I really like that aspect of the character. Like, it makes it, she seems way more special, and we're gonna get her story spread throughout, the MCU in the next couple of years, which I'm excited for, because obviously, like, she's a big character. She can travel the multiverse. That's gonna be a big thing, obviously, if they're gonna do a Secret Wars. So I'm really looking forward to that. I was digging some of the cool, like, multiversal, borderline Mandela effect type ideas that they were playing with like the idea that your dreams are just, visions of a different life from a different multiverse. And I was just like, wow, man, I thought of that when I was a kid. You know what I mean? You think about those ideas when you're a kid, but then Wong goes like, so that dream of being naked running from a clown. And America Chavez is like, yeah, that's probably happened. It's just like, oh shit. So, like me having dreams of flying and stuff like that, those kind of things. I thought that was really, really cool, and they really kind of touched on that, because dreams are so interpretive, and we always think that it's just this kind of like, oh, it's your subconscious trying to communicate to you or whatever. Sometimes it's just random images, and you got to interpret it that way. But if this is another case, it's like, wow, the multiverse is way crazier and more connected than we think. So I love those little, like, I guess that's Michael Waldron, because he came from the Loki show. So that's a lot of those ideas, those weird, sci-fi, metaphysical ideas come from that. So I was really digging that.
How would Inside Out respond to them?
Of dreams.
God, I don't even know, man. I think who's the angry guy again? The really angry one, that comedian?
It's Lewis Black.
I think Lewis Black would have a fucking meltdown beyond any other meltdown we've seen once he realizes there's other Lewis Blacks out there possessed and other beings. But yeah,
I mean, it'll just make your head spin.
That's what I liked about this movie, like the ideas that they threw out there. Again, that's why I like Back to the Future too, man, because they just go with it, with the sci-fi. So I'm glad they went with that direction. And especially like the little things, like when Doctor Strange sees that past memory of him without the beard and like getting the watch, and they show the significance of the watch. I thought that was a good little touch. And then at the same time, I was like, oh, this is some Back to the Future 2 type shit. This is like the shark coming down and biting Marty, and then Marty goes, the shark's still fake. It's that kind of like future technology, but at the same time, it's like it's current. So you know what I mean? Like they just had a lot of fun with the concept. So I was thinking it was the Fox Kids universe at times because of the Professor X thing, but I guess it's just another variant of that Professor X.
Yeah, I think that this movie was good overall. I agree with you that there's been a heavy Back to the Future 2 influence across the board. And the fact that Michael Waldron was a writer on Rick and Morty, I don't think that's a coincidence. I'll say that.
Oh, that was the other thing. Okay, so you know how, have you seen Rick and Morty season 1?
Yes. I mean, it's been a while, but I will probably
remember that they killed the other Rick and Morty, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the same thing that happened with Doctor Strange. They resurrected the body, or they found the dead body of an alternate Doctor Strange, and they just buried it. You know what I mean? That's exactly what they did with Rick and Morty in the first season. So I was like, oh, that's
I do remember this, and that's, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is a strong connection that you have made. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was like, oh man, that's a straight up callback. And then because I was like, God, this is so familiar. Why does it seem so familiar? Oh yeah, Rick and Morty did it. So there you go.
For sure. So I think that's going to about wrap up our thoughts on Doctor Strange. I think I walked out very positive about this movie. I think Brian is even more positive than I am. There is a very mixed reaction out there, but for me, this just includes a ton of callbacks to, fan theories and what the fans want in terms of casting. And I think you get a good score. I think you get a lot of horror elements. If you are a Sam Raimi fan, then I can't imagine you're not thrilled. I mean, it's definitely better than Oz the Great and Powerful, at least, right?
Hell, I think it was better than Drag Me to Hell. So that's just me.
I've not seen Drag Me to Hell. That is not my kind of movie at all. It's better than Spider-Man 3. I would also.
Oh yeah, that's for damn sure.
That far.
I would even say it's better than Darkman 1, which would, I know, piss some people off. So
I mean, Darkman 1 has its charms. It is definitely not a great movie, but Darkman certainly has. I can see why that's a cult classic for sure, and I give them a ton of credit for making this movie as good as it was. And the script wasn't perfect, but I think it was good, and I think that we got a really good third act, which is unusual, and we got some great moments for Wanda / Scarlet Witch. Will she be back in the MCU? Maybe. I mean, with the multiverse, no one's ever really gone, so there's a possibility. But we certainly got an interesting journey with her, from where she started in a post-credit scene of Captain America: Winter Soldier to where we are now with her being in a TV show and all that stuff. So, Brian, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
8 out of 10. I don't know, because I know some people were kind of like, huh? What? At the end credit scene with with Ash? But I like to call him Ash. Yeah, it's just if you're not really a fan and you were looking for something that ties the plot, just wait and watch your clip online, because you'll be sitting there for a while. Because I know some people were just like, well, that's kind of sucked, but the real mid-credit scene is the one with Charlize Theron. That's mid-credits, so you don't have to wait till after the credits for that one.
I mean, you say that, but I would argue Hawkeye has the best post-credit scene of all time with that musical number.
Oh, man. Well, I know you're sick of that, but I can do this all day, so.
For sure. So, speaking of Hawkeye, you could go listen to Ben and Matt talk about Hawkeye tomorrow on this podcasting network, as they are continuing their discussion of 2021 MCU projects. For us, we will be returning to discussing Spider-Man very soon next week, as there's a lot going on, Brian, on this here podcasting network. And I just want to remind everyone that the first Tuesday of June, Kevin Ford and I will be discussing the first half of the final season of Better Call Saul. And unlike Moon Knight, it's really delivering, Brian. It's really delivering. So we've got that. You've got that to look forward to. Brian, are you staying caught up with Better Call Saul?
You know, I never actually watched Better Call Saul, because I just feel like Breaking Bad ended on such a good note for me that if I dive in, I'm just going to feel disappointed. But I know people are not disappointed.
Brian, you really need to watch.
I know.
You have.
I know. But it also feels like Breaking Bad ended for me. You know what I mean? I didn't even because I almost watched the movie on Netflix or whatever years ago.
Brian, have you watched Clone Wars? Have you watched and finished Clone Wars?
I tried Clone Wars, man. I'm not really into the Star Wars animation. That's a whole other discussion.
Brian, you need to watch Better Call Saul.
I know everyone tells me this, but I just don't want to dive back into that universe because I feel like it's over for me.
Okay, it's not over, because there's a lot to say about Better Call Saul.
I know.
How dare you not watch it so you can listen to Kevin and I talk about the first half of the final season in June, and then in September, Kevin and I will be talking about the final 6 episodes that may or may not feature some cameos from 2 of our favorites from Breaking Bad, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I expect nothing less with that, because that's the main money shots right there, is all the cameos connecting all the dots. So that's kind of what I, going in thinking, like, am I just going to go into this thinking, well, I just want to, all the Easter eggs and the dots? Am I going to get sucked into the actual show? I don't know. It's a big investment, because my thing right now is watching old movies late at night. And last time I think I watched The Golden Child, and that didn't really pan out. So do not watch The Golden Child, because we're never going to review it either. So.
All right. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week. More Spider-Man.
It's over.